All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with the land acknowledgement and then go into introductions for today's webinar and to the topic as well. So over to you, Raisa.
Just give me a second here. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. Just going to start with the land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'll pass it to my colleague, Alexandra, to get us started and introduce us to our wonderful guest speakers.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for the Roadmap Connect series on critically assessing risks, optimizing timelines, and project costs in nonprofit-driven affordable housing development. So we have 3 more sessions in this series over the next few weeks, and you can see some of the titles below. So make sure to subscribe for them if you haven't already. But you can also find the first 3 webinars in this series on our website and on our YouTube channel, and we'll include a link later for those who are interested in taking a look. Just a reminder that we'll be recording these sessions, so if you miss anything, you don't have to worry too much about taking notes because they'll all be available online afterwards as well. But also feel free to turn off your cameras during the presentations as well, so you can kind of rest your eyes and focus on the presentations that are being given. But yeah, so this series is brought to you in collaboration with the Infrastructure Institute and CP Planning, and I'll give you a bit of a rundown of different organizations and then introduce you to our 3 guests for today. But first up, we're here from the Infrastructure Institute. And so, actually, okay, we're here from the Infrastructure Institute, and we're a training, advisory, and interdisciplinary research hub at the University of Toronto School of Cities. And our vision is to build local and global expertise in planning for civil and social infrastructure, decision-making, and delivery. And then joining us in collaboration for this series, as I mentioned before, CP Planning. And so CP Planning is a nonprofit urban planning organization practicing a human rights approach to community planning. So their mission is to align public, nonprofit, and private sector organizations within the land use development industry to invest in solutions that uphold their economic, social, and cultural rights of marginalized people, to have access to good housing, good jobs, an adequate standard of living, and opportunities for cultural expression. And their work really is about envisioning a world with more joy, where people are affirmed through a sense of community and belonging. And their strategic priorities focus on affordable housing, jobs in the trades and urban agriculture, and access to community service spaces. And so this project is a part of the roadmap. And so the roadmap is short for the Roadmap for Redevelopment Plans to Confront Systemic Racism, which seeks to address the problem of systemic racism, displacement, and low planning outputs of affordable housing. And so this particular series is actually part of Roadmap Connect. And so what it does is that it's actually building off of the Infrastructure Institute's existing suite of SPRE, so social purpose real estate mentorship programs, as well as CP Planning's roadmap to provide targeted support through webinars like this, but our other programming as well, to facilitate nonprofits led by racialized people to successfully pursue and implement affordable housing development programs. And so in the next slide, we'll go into a bit more about today's session. And so, as I mentioned before, it's all about critically assessing risks. So in this webinar, our speakers are going to speak to explore some of the risks and timelines and delays in the development process, as well as some of the costs, indicators, and ways to mitigate these risks further. And our hope is that, by hearing this information, you, as part of the different organizations and groups and collectives you're a part of, will be able to better plan and implement mitigation strategies to reduce these risks and costs in your projects. And so today we have 3 guests who will each present, and then we'll have a panel discussion and a Q&A. So keep note of any questions that you may have so we can have a really animated discussion. So first up, we have Tristina. And Tristina is a principal of real estate development at SHS Consulting. Tristina is a community development planner with expertise in affordable housing, real estate finance, and social purpose real estate. Tristina most recently held the role of director of social purpose real estate for Artscape, where she led the execution of projects in pre-development with a focus on affordable housing and community and cultural infrastructure. And prior to this role, Tristina supported real estate strategy and planning for the City of Toronto's real estate portfolio at Create PO. So welcome, Tristina. And then next we also have Tim Welch, and he's the principal at Tim Welch Consulting. And he has over 30 years of experience in assisting communities, creating housing that is accessible and affordable to low and moderate income households. Tim has provided strategic, practical advice to nonprofits and private sector developers of affordable housing, as well as municipalities and housing sector organizations. So welcome, Tim. And then last but not least, we also have Greg Gilbert, the Vice President at Planning at Fitzrovia. And so Greg is currently responsible for overseeing acquisitions, planning, and project design of Fitzrovia's purpose-built rental apartment portfolio, including 15 towers that are currently under construction in Toronto. So this includes community relations, planning approvals, and exploring partnerships in local and emerging markets to design and deliver the lively, stable, and sustainable rental communities of tomorrow. So all great work, all exciting information to come from our guests. But first up, we have Tristina. So I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alexandra. I'm just going to share. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Would you mind letting me? Perfect. Great. Let me just maximize this. Great. And can everybody see my screen? Perfect. So hi, everybody. My name is Tristina Sinopoli. I'm one of the principals here at SHS Consulting, and I'm excited to kind of talk to you today about analyzing and understanding risks and some of the costs that are involved within the development process. I have two very quick parts to the presentation. I'll just kind of quickly tell you a little bit about our firm, and then I'll dive into the meat of the presentation, which will be on the development process and key costs. So the goals for today and the goals as a part of my presentation are really to kind of understand some of the key risks related to the development timeline and some of the project costs that are associated with that. And then I also brought a kind of a practical example to help you understand how to manage risk and some of the best practices that we have around kind of monitoring risks should a project decide not to proceed for one reason or another. So very quickly, just at a high level, who are we at SHS Consulting? We're a national organization. We have a large team that is really focused on kind of advancing affordable housing really across Canada. These are just some of our very high level stats here on some of the great work that we've done. Our team is actually divided into 3 practice areas. We have a business innovation practice, policy and research, and kind of housing and real estate development. And that's the practice area that I lead with our team. And then at a very high level, we have a really wide kind of cross-functional team with a variety of kind of backgrounds and disciplines. And we really think that that helps to kind of bring multiple perspectives to all the work that we do. So I'm really excited to be able to kind of bring to you my kind of planning and finance expertise. And it's kind of nested in really 30 years of experience from our great kind of cross-disciplinary team that we have. So that's a very quick intro. Happy to talk more about SHS, but I really want to get into the heart of our presentation, which is about the development process and key costs. So I thought that I would share just a quick slide at a very high level to just talk about some of the phases of development, just for some context setting. So typically there are kind of 3 main phases, and then the 4th phase is around operations and kind of getting started, which I won't spend too much time talking about today. But the main phases within the development process are feasibility, where we are really asking the question of, is there a there to this project? Is our dream, is our vision, can it be grounded in some type of reality? Could there be a viable business plan or financial model or pathway forward to really take the concept that we have for our project and really bring it into reality? That's what feasibility is. It's kind of answering the question of, can this dream become reality? If we get past that question and we say, yes, we think it can, then a project moves into development. And that's really beginning to take all of the necessary actions to bring that project to fruition, whether that is coming up with kind of the full complex design, securing development approvals, getting all the necessary funding ready to build that building, and then ensuring that there are tenants or future owners kind of ready at the end of the day to occupy that building. So that's the development phase. And the development phase, the real goal of the development phase is to advance the project ideally to construction. And the construction phase is exactly as it is. It's about building the project and then selling it or leasing it out, again, depending on what the structure of the project looks like. In my role, I'm largely focused on affordable housing. So our takeover also includes operations and getting the project ready for operations for affordable rental housing. So the process, it sounds like it's linear. The reality is that it's not linear in any way. Sometimes things change, sometimes things start and go or on pause for one reason or another. Sometimes a project that doesn't look feasible today might have a change in the funding landscape or might have a change in the local planning regime that actually makes the project more viable or makes it easier to proceed forward for one reason or another. So there's sometimes a lot of back and forth in some of our project phases as we're advancing projects forward. I'm not going to go through this slide in too much detail, but this just gives you a sense of some of the key activities that are taking place at each of these phases, as well as some of the outputs. And what I want to flag here for the outputs, in particular in the development stage, is that these are generally kind of the most cost-intensive outputs, really securing your entitlements in your planning process, getting your architectural designs ready to go and ready for tender, getting a builder on board, getting to building permit. These are some of kind of the largest outputs that you see occurring on the development side, and that's where a majority of the costs lie, with the exception of the actual hard construction costs to build the building. But when we're talking about risk in the development process, these are really some of the cost risks that we're really monitoring for and accounting for should a project not proceed forward, and kind of those sunk costs that then exist for a building that doesn't get built at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do kind of in these next 3 slides, or I'm just going to share at a high level just some of the costs that we would anticipate to see in these 3 stages, and then some of our recommendations on how we mitigate these costs and manage these costs to really manage the risk of not sinking costs into a project that for some reason or another might not proceed, or kind of matching the risk tolerance of the organization. So at the feasibility stage, the main costs that are really incurred are kind of costs of doing the feasibility study and the business plan. This often includes a high-level concept plan as well as a pro forma or financial model that helps to underscore what the actual kind of financial basis of the building is going to look like, what the initial budget might look like, the cost of construction. So at this stage, a group may or may not have a development consultant on board, or they may or may not have an architect developing a concept plan. Some organizations are able to do kind of a high-level back-of-the-envelope concept plan, and other groups require an architect to really come in and help understand what's within the realm of possibility for the site. And then again, some groups are able to do and lead their own business plan and feasibility study, and then other groups bring on a development consultant to do so. I should also flag here that I'm largely talking about groups that already own their land. That's the kind of the majority of clients that I work with in the nonprofit affordable housing space. But of course, if a group doesn't own land, the feasibility stage would be that time to decide whether or not to proceed with an acquisition of land. So all of the due diligence would be taking place to determine, do we even buy this site? Do we put in an offer? Do we clear our conditions and actually acquire it? And think about kind of what that cost of the acquisition might look like. So that's definitely a key part of the feasibility stage before going into construction. But with the nonprofits that I work, the vast majority already own their land outright typically. So what are some ways that we can mitigate risks within the feasibility phase? Well, the first that I would share is that when it comes to development consultants or architects and architect teams that come on board, all of those contracts can be structured in such a way where if the project doesn't proceed for one reason or another, then there's an off ramp in that contract. So you might be signing a full services development contract or a full services architectural contract, but if the project, oh, sorry, I think someone isn't on mute. Okay. So if for one reason or another a project doesn't proceed to kind of its subsequent stage of development or construction, the group is not obligated to kind of pay the full cost of the architect contract or the full cost of the development consultant's contract. That the work is phased in such a way that it protects the group in the event that they don't proceed for one reason or another. Some other tips that we'll share is it's always good to set up invoice tracking and monitor expenses early. So the second a group signs a contract, or the second a group receives an invoice, that should be tracked and monitored, and really all record keeping should be kept separately. So there's a clear line of sight of how much is this project costing us and how much money or cash flow do we have to support this project. Another piece of advice that I'll share is it's really important to be clear about goals and expectations, and really understand the implications of making decisions or delaying decisions. So for example, if it takes a board 6 months to make a decision on whether or not they even want to acquire a piece of land, there's risks there in terms of the cost of that land going up or other bidders coming to the table and driving the price of that land up. So it's always important to know, which decisions need to be made quickly, which ones can take a little bit more time, and then understanding that every piece of time could have an implication on cost if things are delayed for one reason or another. Which is why we also recommend setting up a kind of an appropriate governance structure. So a housing committee, board of directors, senior management, really knowing who's responsible for making key decisions, and then having a clear project lead to actually convey those decisions. And then the last piece is determining a procurement approach that really kind of meets the risk tolerance of the organization. And I think Tim's slide is going to be talking about some of the procurement approaches. So it's going to be good to hear how we balance risks kind of within the procurement approach. On the development side, as I shared before, with the exception of construction, the development stage is really the stage where you see a lot of costs come into play. Most of the costs are usually related to site studies and the design. So these are just a list of potential site studies that a group might have to obtain in order to get to zoning approval or site plan application approval. These are the various, in addition for design, these are the kind of various phases of design that an architect would be working on, kind of the various drawing packages. Each package itself would represent a % of their fee. And so as you advance from schematic to design development to construction drawings, those costs increase. Any type of project management, legal fees, cost consultant fees, a lot of these soft costs are really what are going to be incurred at the development stage. So in terms of some advice on how to manage these here, the first is to really understand the organization's risk tolerance for expenditures and understand what milestones they need to feel confident in order to be able to advance to the next phase. So for example, a group might say, a rezoning is too risky for us. We need to make sure that the site is fully zoned and we have our zoning approvals in place before we begin on preparing our site plan application and sinking costs into those studies. Another group might say, no, I want to do everything simultaneously. I'm comfortable with the risk of approaching rezoning and site plan at the exact same time. And I'm comfortable with sinking costs in the event that something has to change on the site plan application side. So again, it really depends on the risk tolerance of the organization, the milestones that they want to see. We recommend always building in contingency into budgets, even for soft costs, because there's always the chance that you have to go back, edit a report, edit a study, get an update to it, really depending on comments and feedback that come back from the local municipality. Again, always monitoring and scheduling and monitoring the budget and scheduling throughout the process, setting really clear go or no-go frameworks to really understand what's going to be required for the project to proceed. It's also really important to understand the planning approvals pathway and how that impacts the development timeline. So a site that requires an official plan amendment is going to be a much more long and costly endeavor than a site that just requires a minor variance, for example. And then, of course, we always recommend that groups are planning for cash flow needs, because in the case of affordable housing, the vast majority of funding sources really flow at the start of construction, with the exception of things like seed funding and other smaller pre-development sources. But cash flow is something that we really work with our clients to really monitor. And then lastly, getting proper cost estimates, doing class A through D cost estimates, depending on where you are in the development cycle, and really having a cost consultant really vet and demonstrate what the project costs may be looking at. And then lastly, here at the construction stage, the other costs that come in are really any remaining soft costs that might be outstanding, things like the remainder of design fees, legal fees, financing, insurance, and the like. The vast majority of project costs at the construction stage are the actual hard costs themselves, things like demolition, site works, actually building the building, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and then any organizational costs as they pertain to actually getting ready for things like lease up or getting ready for kind of what operations is going to look like. In terms of some advice and kind of managing these risks, it's always important to make sure that the final project budget actually meets all of the funder expectations and that the budget is balanced and there's a matching contribution that can fund a project. So for instance, if a group is working on a capital raise campaign, that capital raise campaign should be fully done and all the funds should be through the door before a project gets into construction, and most funders will look for that as well. Some other risk mitigants as well. In the affordable housing space, many, if not all, lenders will require a fixed price contract or a guaranteed max price contract. And that's a way of managing risk on the budget side, at least managing the hard cost risk. We also recommend allowing ample time for pre-qualification and tendering of the builder to make sure that the right builder is coming through the door that really can meet the needs of the group that's actually building the housing. We also recommend building full contingency into the final construction budget. Even if you think the budget is ironclad, it's still important to have a 5% contingency kind of at the bare minimum on the hard cost side. And then again, monitoring the budget and planning for operational startup. So here at a really, really high level, I just wanted to share an example of what we would call kind of a critical milestones and stage gating process that we work with some of our clients. So in this particular case, there are some key milestones related to design, municipal approvals, kind of the financial model, as well as the funding model for this particular project that are key as we advance the project forward. In this particular case, we've also shown what off-ramps might look like. So there might be a chance as we're working through development that we receive all of the site studies or some of the site studies, and there's something that tells us from a development or developability perspective that there's a major impediment to building. So for example, a soils report might come back and say that the cost to actually get the soils to a standard where they can support the building are just much more outside of the realm of possibility for costs that the project can absorb, for example. Another type of off-ramp might be, as we're advancing forward, it's very clear that the project costs are exceeding the type of financing or funding sources that might be available, or the kind of pathway to zoning, or there's an unfavorable zoning outcome that makes it a little bit of a non-starter for a group to move forward. And then as we move farther down the process, there might be kind of risks around the tender price not aligning with the budget, and that could be a major impediment where a group might want to off-ramp if through retendering and really trying to find the right builder, we're still not able to get a tender price that matches what the budget looks like. That's very rare, but it is a risk and it is an off-ramp that groups should be planning for. So this just kind of shows you just an example of stage gating when we're managing really all of the risks that I shared earlier in the presentation. So I'll stop there and I'll see if there are any questions before we move to our great next speakers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tristina. That was really amazing. And yeah, if there are any questions that people have specific to the presentation, you can post them in the chat now or raise your hand, or we can bring them up later too if more questions come throughout. And just to note also, we will share the slide decks, and that was a very clear, like so well put together slide deck. I love how you really clarified, like, you know, the risks and ways to mitigate, like during each phase in that way. And then also the like idea of off ramps is really, I think, really crucial to this conversation. All right, so thank you. And I think we will pass it over to Tim for our next presentation. And Tim, would you like us to share our screens, or are you okay to do it?
That would be great if you could share the screens. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Raisa, are you okay?
Yeah, I won't be able to take.
Okay. I will share my screen in just a second.
And noting that Tristina and Greg, we didn't coordinate in terms of, it's always a challenge on some panels that who's going to be covering what in the different presentations. So I think I've got a little bit of a different take on some of the aspects of this, but certainly Tristina had all kinds of great advice in her presentation. So we're looking at both challenges and some of the risks that community-based or nonprofit housing developments are looking for or have to look out for during the development phase. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, our firm, TWC, is a team of 13 staff working at both affordable housing development and project management, as well as work in housing strategies, research and program evaluation. And we've worked quite a lot with nonprofits on both intensifying and doing some redevelopment and repair on their existing housing projects as well. Next slide. We've had over the last 15 years about 35 developments, some fairly small, but some great community groups we've been able to work with have helped support over 1,400 units created in Southern Ontario in the last decade and a half. The project here is actually a new Indigenous housing shelter that is hopefully getting an occupancy permit this month, according to the call I was on this morning. So it does take some time in terms of developing new affordable housing, supportive housing, transitional housing, etc. But some days you do actually get there. Next slide, please. So going way, way back, there was an old quote back when I was in university, used to read on occasion about never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. But these days, when we look about new housing, we sort of modify that a little bit. Next slide, please. So that never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens that happen to own land and have $10 million in the bank can change the world. So it's not, for those who were involved a number of decades ago in housing programs in the 80s and early 90s, there wasn't quite as it was challenging, but it's a little more challenging in terms of having things come together to create new affordable housing. Next slide. So a number of things that Tristina talked about, the challenge of accessing land if you don't have land already. One of the challenges, and this can be a risk because over a development phase, it typically can be perhaps 4 to 5 years between the initial concept and occupancy, and occasionally longer than 5 years for some projects we've been involved with. So you have the risk of the different government programs that support new affordable housing often change during that period, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. So there's a lot of that kind of challenge and risk analysis, as well as talking about the cash flow challenges during development. When is some of that government funding or financing that a nonprofit is relying on to make sure the project can move forward and pay the bills? The programs are somewhat cautious in terms of flowing of funds. The last couple of years, we've had the huge impact of increasing interest rates. We have had a main program from the federal government, from CMHC, that 4 years ago, we were getting interest rates actually below 1%, and that made projects work much better. When we're dealing with interest rates of close to 4% when you're locking in, it gets just a lot more challenging to make the financial pro forma work. And of course, over the last 3 to 4 years, from the start of COVID onwards, we've had a huge increase in construction costs that have been much, much higher than the rate of inflation, somewhat bordering probably on 50% increase in construction costs over the last 4 years. There's also the challenge in terms of when we look at nonprofit organizations, that great group of I'll say keen and enthusiastic volunteers that want to meet the need in the community. They can volunteer time, but do they actually have the resources? Do they hire professionals to undertake some of that work? Because it is going to be a number of years of commitment to try and bring the housing to a successful completion. And then the challenge of the planning approvals processing and the risks involved in going through that, as have been touched on already, but that it can certainly be a lengthy and often discouraging process to a nonprofit board that's trying to move forward something in the community. Next slide. So as mentioned, that occasionally things do happen. This is just a nice small scale example, but it was still a 5-year process for an Indigenous housing provider in Toronto. Had land through a long-term land lease, an existing building on a long-term land lease in the city of Toronto, and was able to tuck in on a unused parking lot 12 units of 1-bedroom homes that connected to their existing building, so they could actually have those accessible through the existing elevator in the building. So by, in their case, they always had that land, and access to that land. So that was a risk they didn't have to take in terms of going out to secure land. But we're working actually just last week with a nonprofit co-op that was going to remortgage its existing land, its existing building, to purchase a piece of land for about $1 million. That was next door to its lots, a piece of land they've looked at for years, but their board was comfortable with the risk of remortgaging. They were essentially paying off their mortgage this year to buy that land, even though they didn't know if it was going to work financially in terms of government funding programs to make the new deal come together. But their board weighed the pros and cons of this neighboring parcel coming up they've been waiting for years, and felt they were prepared to take that risk because they could manage it financially with just through a refinancing of the existing building. There's lots of proponents, of course, who are not in the position to be able to make that kind of risk in terms of tying up pieces of land. Next slide. So even though it's a long and can sometimes be a frustrating process, it is really important to set the goals for your organization, the housing that you're looking to create, and you're going to channel your energy into create that housing or housing with supports in many cases. But it's also something to take a look at for some particularly smaller organizations. Are there different ways of still achieving those housing goals? And in some ways, lessening, not eliminating, but lessening some of the risks. So probably the riskiest option is doing the direct development yourselves as a standalone organization. There are many large nonprofits that own and operate hundreds and a few cases in Ontario, thousands of units, have financial resources, have some expertise to move forward, but others are smaller community organizations that might provide support services, but haven't done development before. So they might look at options that are collaborating with another nonprofit to do a joint development, perhaps a nonprofit group that has more experience in development. They can further potentially lessen some of the risk by doing what's called a turnkey development, where you might partner with a good private sector developer builder, for example. Maybe Greg will present options on that to collaborate, but it still could be where the nonprofit could own the development at the end, but is not involved in all the different details along the way, decision making. And there can also be still a positive outcome where we've worked with some nonprofits. They might invest something, have an arrangement with another organization that is going to build and own the housing, but through the nonprofit's involvement, will still have a long-term 20-year or more access to those affordable units. And that obviously lessens the risk for the organization that way. Next slide. So a few things just to talk about is overcoming some of the challenges. So as we talked about, land is so key in terms of getting a new affordable housing development moving. We've worked with a lot of groups where they are able to do sometimes small scale, like the picture I just showed you a few slides earlier, or to intensify, in some cases, redevelop their own sites. There's a lot of outreach since most organizations don't have the financial resources to go and buy land. Occasionally that happens, but to connect with a lot of other community organizations in your neighborhood, in your city, whether it's faith organizations, legions that have faith organizations that have dwindling congregations in some cases, or legions that are not as busy as they were decades ago. Other community organizations that own land that are interested in trying to meet a variety of housing needs in the community. There's also looking to overcome that challenge of all government land that can be at the city of Toronto certainly has been quite active and is ramping up even further, looking at its municipal resources for land. So trying to look for opportunities in your neighborhood, connect with local city councillor, see if there are land opportunities coming up. And in the probably more rare occasion for a large organization, do they have the ability to refinance the land that they own right now? We've worked with a number of nonprofits that developed 35 or so years ago, and they've paid off their mortgage, so have the financial room to refinance in order to purchase land. One of the other big challenges is moving forward some of the different stages that Tristina talked about, and trying to come up with the money to cover those costs. So in the initial phases of the early concept or doing due diligence about the land, is the soils good, is no contamination, etc. There can be some programs. There is a program called CMHC Seed Funding, which has been around for just about 20 years now. It had a break for the last 16, 17 months where no funding was available, but some groups have been able to access anywhere from sort of 20,000 to 100 to 150,000 to deal with some of those costs. There's another organization, the Community Housing Transformation Center, that can provide a little bit of funding. And they've certainly tried to do some promotion for having those fundings available for racialized communities. there are a couple of examples of larger scale funding programs that have a specific focus for Indigenous housing, for example. That's what the NICHI acronym is. And you'll see our housing world, of course, is cursed with endless acronyms that sometimes we can explain, sometimes we just keep using those acronyms. There's been an initiative from CMHC the last couple of years that's targeted some capital funding for Black-led nonprofit organizations under what was called the co-investment program at CMHC. So we're seeing governments responding partially in terms of trying to have some additional resources available for racialized communities that might not have the resources of some of the existing larger nonprofit organizations. Next slide. And for overcoming the challenges about the costs that when you're trying to get through the more detailed planning approvals, even for a small project, you can easily run into a couple $100,000, and for larger buildings, over 100 units, you can probably get into $1 million or more for the soft costs. And of course, for most nonprofit groups, it is, okay, where does that money come from? And so we have, and as I'm sure SHS has, a lot of groups saying the federal government's got $70 billion for housing. We hear that figure. They've heard that from their local members of parliament, which is great. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, what's available for the early stages or prior to construction is a very small percentage of that dollars. So that's sort of the catch-22, that you have to get your project advanced through the planning, through the due diligence stages before you can unlock or have some of that larger funding released. And so groups say, well, how can I get through the planning approvals funding and all the due diligence unless I have some of that funding released? And the government will say, federal government will say, we're not releasing that till we know you've successfully gone through all those points. So that's a huge challenge for many nonprofit groups of trying to how to cash flow their way and have a reasonable balance of the risk of spending that money when you don't know 100% certain that everything else is going to come together. We're hopeful there's a new source of funding from the federal government that's been transferred to the City of Toronto and other municipalities called the Housing Accelerator Fund. So we don't know what the decisions are from the City Council, but we're hopeful that some of that funding could be made to help bridge some of those middle due diligence planning approval costs. We'll see. Or it would be also very helpful that in reopening seed funding, is there going to be an ability to provide perhaps some larger medium-sized amounts for that due diligence. On the issue of faster planning approvals and the old time is money, we have seen some changes at the provincial level of changes to the Planning Act that are moving things a little faster. And we've also seen at the City of Toronto for some affordable housing proponents, C2K is an acronym they use about accelerated approvals for new affordable housing. And we are seeing things move forward more quickly. So again, with some targeted municipal initiatives, things actually can move forward more quickly than the traditional 2 to 3 years for zoning bylaw amendments and site plan in the City of Toronto. Next slide. So we often talk about lasagna funding because so many housing programs, there's not one great perfect source of funding. You've got to pull together from a lot of different programs to make it all come together. And we have very many projects that are 5, 6, 7 different types of funding. Some small, might be 20, 30,000 or 100,000, and others larger ones. But it is just a reality. And the more that you are able to layer on the different levels of funding, the more likely are you able to access more funding for an organization. Success breeds success in that sense. So this is a metaphor we use just because people get it. Not bad. And I really like lasagna, so there we go. Next slide. I've got just more as a leave behind, keeping an eye on the time of the variety of programs that can be some of those layers. Many at the federal level, some at the municipal level. a few at the provincial level. We'd probably like to see more at the provincial level, if I may make a pitch, if anyone from the province was listening in. So again, I won't spend time to go through those. Let's go to the next couple of slides. Next slide. But also just to finish off more positively, that eventually you can get it. We've got one of our largest projects now just beginning construction in Malvern area of Scarborough. For the first phase is 201 units. So with a huge effort, 5 years plus from the volunteer board there, we've got construction just beginning now. So keep at it, and good luck for those who are wanting to move things forward. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tim. Yeah, and I really appreciate you going through or including that list of funding sources, because that and the lasagna, I'm going to start using that in our team meetings now, because that's much more delicious than the terms that finance stacking that we usually use. And I think also just like that, like emphasizing, you know, that slide looking at like different approaches that organizations can consider in, you know, not necessarily like taking on all the risk on your own if you've never done a project, or if you know are relatively new, yeah, and really considering like how you can partner to mitigate risk and, you know, be more successful with the project. Maybe we'll take Ainsley's question, and then we'll go into Greg's presentation soon. Oh, you're on mute.
We can absolutely put this question on hold if it's not relevant. But Tim, you mentioned something about, you talked about boards. What one of the challenges is, you know, when I look at the different board members that are involved, is they were involved in building projects over 20 years ago. Like they're really not up to date on how all of this works. So, you know, we all take all of these courses. We know how a funding stack works. We know how the process works. We know when to bring in different consultants. But for the boards, this can be really big and scary. And so sometimes it's challenging for me to, when I talk to the board about these, to let them know that, you know, in the same way I hire an accountant, we would also hire so-and-so. We don't need 12 building experts on our board. I don't need to do a construction project management certificate. So I'm just wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that, and we can totally defer that if you've got other material that you have to get through. It's just, I feel like as us and leaders, we're taking all these courses and our knowledge is up to here, but our boards get really scared and stuck here and trying to make interesting suggestions of how to move past that.
And I just one quick comment is I think showing other recent examples where things have worked and of a similar size scale, whether you're doing 12 units or 200 units, to try and talk about parallel examples, whether it's ideally in the same city or something not too far away. We do work a variety of places. And you can never say, oh, in Toronto, they did this, and in every other city, oh, no, that's Toronto. That's something totally different. So you try to find a good local parallel example, or a similar, if you're working with a supportive housing organization, for example, to talk about other supportive housing organizations, how they've made it happen in the last couple of years. And yes, you do need to bring in professionals. The board is not going to be constructing. The board is not going to be the accountant, etc. So to say, yeah, there is expertise out there, and it needs to make sure, the board needs to make sure they get the right team in place. So often you can start with one. Your boards might know a local architect they work with, even an architect who did building 30 years ago for them when in previous programs, to bring back in and to give that level of comfort that yes, things have changed somewhat since you last did housing, but there are ways to make it move forward. But I think good parallel examples can help a board a lot.
Awesome, thank you. And I think I also see a question in the chat, and we'll I think just in terms of timing, we'll leave any remaining questions to the panel discussion session, are part of the webinar. So thank you so much, Tim. And I'm going to pass it over to Greg now for our next presentation. And just to confirm, would you like us to share your slides, or are you okay to do it?
I'll share my own screen.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Okay. Should see PDF, tips to be private partner ready. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
So you can see the About Me slide.
Yep.
Okay, great. So just some background on myself. Kind of have a predictable path of urban planning and development, starting with University of Western Ontario, University of Calgary, a number of volunteering stints with Habitat for Humanity in Chatham, Kent, which was my first job as a planner with the municipality there. Also worked with the city of Melbourne in Australia for a period of time in grad school, and then also with a BIA in Calgary called the Victoria Park Business Improvement Zone. I've also been worked for a large engineering company, WSP, still very active in the development space, and also a planning consultant in Chatham, Kent. I'm currently a vice president of planning at Fitzrovia, located at Yonge and St. Clair in Toronto. I've worked for a small developer in Woodstock and also for another firm called Trolleybus Urban Development. I just wrote, I'm an obsessed city builder. I don't know what got carried away with the P's, but people, places, projects, pride, and passion. That's kind of what I came up with this morning. That's kind of how I structure myself. Fitzrovia, our current firm, where I work for almost 2 years now, founded with a vision to create a true vertically integrated developer. We acquire, design, construct, and manage across the board. The most kind of well-known business line that you may know is we call the Collection, which is around 6,000 Class A purpose-built rental apartments, all in Toronto, at various stages of development. If you're familiar with our College in Spadina project, it's called the Waverley. Kind of light bulb went off there. It's right next to U of T. It's been a high uptick of students, so we're looked at launching a student housing brand under the Waverley, and our second project is located near TMU at 412 Church Street. And then a recent business we've gotten into is working with our institutional partners on kind of repositioning and rebranding vintage apartments. We have a project in Moss Park, Parkdale, and a couple in Quebec under the Maddox brand. Just some background on how we operate. As I mentioned, we're fully integrated, and that comes down to some umbrella businesses that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. We have a very specific set of skills, not to make a Liam Neeson reference, but we're very proud of what we do, and we do know our blind spots. And just on the affordable housing and partnership space, it's something we're working on. We are trying to develop these opportunities, and we also don't know where to start. We have a lot going on. Our projects are huge, and we've tried a couple things I'm going to talk about that maybe didn't work, and we have some ideas and things that we are working on that are really going well with our nonprofit partners. Just some of the projects in Toronto, I'll skip through. This is a map of Toronto. They're all over the place. We have 15 towers under construction right now in the city of Toronto, all through downtown east and west, down on the Danforth, Yorkdale Mall, if anybody's been up there recently driving on the 401. It's our probably most well-known project I'm going to talk about today is Bloor and Dufferin, the old Kent School, right at the Dufferin subway station on the Bloor line. Very large project with an affordable housing standalone building there, very large community hub in the old Kent School. We do things much differently than the condo developers, and I could talk about this all day, but just looking at our floor plan on the bottom, this is a condo floor plan, typically around 400 square feet. Just really small. You don't even have room really for end tables and a queen bed, a place to put your TV, a sectional, a kitchen island. You look at what we do, we're around 550 square feet, very livable, just a very different kind of design standard that we adhere to, and we do not deviate from this. Every single project we do is purpose-built rental, and we're obsessed with the details. We have to lease this thing over and over and over, these units. Somebody's going to walk through it. If a hallway doesn't work, if they can't get their couch through, they're not going to lease it. So we got to live with these mistakes, and we like control. And there's a couple things I'll talk about later on about that. So I talked about some of our umbrella brands and how we like to control things. We did have a coffee operator in our Waverley project near U of T. We ended up starting our own coffee brand called Attendees. It's been fantastic. We're putting that in all of our projects. We can control the process. We can control the staff. train them to be owners and think like owners. We also have a very exciting, something we do very differently is cater to young families in our projects. It's a big bet by our company and our partners that we're going to have way more 2 and 3 bedrooms than the condos going up downtown. In order to do that, we need to solve the daycare and amenities for families. And one way we're doing that is putting a daycare nursery school in our buildings that we are owning and operating ourselves, called the Bloomsbury Academy. Another just nice perk is we have Cleveland Clinic rooms or offices in our projects where someone can access a physician and get a prescription for, I think, 50 common ailments, similar to the new pharmacy model. And then we have a variety of partnerships with different groups like Voila and Sobeys that just add value to our buildings. So I kind of came up with a list of 10 things or tips that from my experience, that can have some of the partners on the call be ready to engage and ready to work with us and kind of be a good partner and kind of nail that first date, if you will. So we're gonna end on these slides, but delay skill projects. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And many of our competitors in the pension fund space, they seem to get in their own way. They're global investors, and they're looking at investing in a toll highway in Portugal or redeveloping a mall in Markham. So there's a lot of competing interests. They go very slow. And then by the time a decision's made, maybe costs have gone up and that opportunity's kind of gone by. That's not us. We're quick, swift, confident decision makers, and we've solved problems on the fly. As I mentioned, we have a very specific set of skills. We do everything in-house, and that's increasing every day, and including bringing our interior design team in-house, for example, which is not something you see most developers. Any kind of partnerships that we need to enter into, they need to have an obvious kind of benefit to ourselves and our partners. We are managing pension fund taxpayer dollars, and unfortunately, it's not a charity. I can't go to, like, we have a fiduciary duty to represent the taxpayer, and these deals need to make sense for everybody and not just be kind of in the goodness of our heart, unfortunately. We expect our partners to know your tools. Tim talked about them: open door funding, housing accelerator. These things are changing every day. It seems like we cannot keep up. We expect you as the partners to know what's going on, and then we can engage in better conversations where you come to us with solutions. And then build a referral network. You want to be the first person that gets mentioned when someone's talking about the specific business that you provide or kind of benefit to a potential partner. Just quickly, too often development's kind of asked to solve too many problems, and often the project vision of these partners gets diluted. You have a lot of competing interests. I'm going to talk about an example in Moss Park. It's really important when we have these first meetings to anoint your project champions and then give them the tools to speak on your behalf. Don't overwhelm your partners. It's kind of like meeting that extended family for the first time. If you walk into this giant room of people, you're not going to be yourself. You're not going to feel comfortable. That's just an observation I've had with some examples. And there's really great operators out there, and I feel like that gets lost in these conversations. You need to be proud of your experience, showcase your operational chops, and that's how you can kind of nail that first date. So just on diluting the vision, don't dilute the vision. Figure out what you need and make the ask clear. This is a really sad example. I spent my first 5 years in Toronto in this neighborhood, and there was a private donation from a private anonymous donor that was, like, I think, a significant amount of money, around $25 million. And they started coming up with this scheme for Moss Park to do a new community hub. And eventually many groups got involved. The list of requirements came too long and costs went up. The original proposal became unfeasible, and it just fell victim to these kind of complicated structures and frameworks. It's back on the table now after several years, but it's just, things can get too complicated trying to do too much, and the vision fades. This is just it. We had a proposal for an unnamed post-secondary institution. We kind of made it to the final presentation, and we entered the room, and it kind of looked like this. And not to mention all the people in the boardroom, there was 30 people on Zoom. It was really terrifying, to be honest, thinking that all these people may have a hand in these decision makings. It just gave us a lot of nervous energy just around delaying this project and delaying the process. And just we opted out at the end, even though we made the final round. It was just extremely overwhelming. And it was a real unfortunate circumstance because we really wanted to do the project, and it became scary walking into a room like this. Just another example, if you're engaging with a partner, it's good to have a small group of engaged participants. The conversations are better. You don't fall into this trap of, oh, I'll get back to you. You find ways to kind of work through, find solutions. Everything's kind of on the table. You build trust. The same people are at the meetings over and over. So this just falls back to kind of anoint your champions and allow them to kind of decide and talk on your behalf. You can have committees in the background kind of feeding these champions, but the conversations are so much better when you have people active in a small group. And that's how we've seen success on some of our partnerships. Again, know your tools. Tim talked about this, but I would say the most straightforward one for us is the new community benefits charge. For any project we do, we need to write a check to the city for 4% of our land value, but there's been growing opportunities to negotiate with councillors and kind of prioritize a project that can offset that 4% land value. So this is probably the easiest and most straightforward. And as long as we can find something early in the process with a partner that can offset that 4% charge, we'd rather have that money go towards something tangible and someone that can benefit something in the community rather than into the city coffer, into the abyss where we don't know where it's going to go. Know your partner. As I mentioned, we're very different than a lot of our partners. We move uncomfortably quick because we have to. As rental developers, it's a really difficult space to operate in, and speed and delay is delays kill projects, and that's why you don't see a lot of people building rental. It's very cost prohibitive. We're very specific on our design playbook and standards, and we do most of our design and decision making in-house. We have a very strong brand, and we need to protect our brand. If you go on Google reviews, we have, I think, 4.8 stars or something, where our competitors are 2 stars, 3 stars. We need to protect that brand. And anytime we enter into a partnership, we need that partner to debunk the potential stigma around whatever's out there. It's really unfortunate, but when we talk to tenants and we do focus groups and things like that, they need to know they're living in a safe building, and there is still a stigma out there, and we're going to need to find ways to work with our partners and mix groups together in the right way. And these things, the way we operate is not always congruent with private nonprofit partners. I've spoken with churches about potential joint venture developments. Sometimes you have smaller, more educated groups. And then sometimes you have these kind of retired, busybody committee members that maybe the industry has passed them by, but they still kind of hold their relevancy as kind of subject matter experts, and that can really injure and hurt the decision making. Just want to talk about what's been working and what hasn't been working. This is our Bloor Dufferin project. We have a very large community hub that we're working with the city on here. And then we have a standalone affordable housing building, 56 units that will be handed over to the city free and clear, and they will give off to an operator of their choice. So that's been working really well. So what has been working? The Housing Secretariat, I cannot say how fantastic they have been, especially in the last couple months. We are sending them a set of drawings, very detailed drawings. They have a peer review architect that they're paying, a very expert architect. We're getting comments back. They're supposed to be in 10 days. We're getting them in 5, 6, 7 days. It's fantastic. And they're acting as an intermediary. They're experts. They know where to push and pull with us, and we're really getting stuff done that way. Same thing with the community hub. We have a very dedicated group at the city that is kind of acting as the champion on behalf of these smaller groups. They're the ones kind of armed with the decision-making tools to engage with us and work through these design issues. We added some washrooms, we added an elevator, just working through a lot of those design items. And then we hand over a built-out space for them to do what they want. So what's kind of hasn't been working on a couple projects. This is our Moss Park project. It's 2 existing buildings at 191 Sherburne. We're putting in 2 new purpose-built rental buildings. We were proposing a large community hub on the corner. We originally thought it'd be a great spot for a library. We worked through the library channels with the councillor. They ultimately deemed that it was not necessary at this location. So we were stuck with this kind of half-baked idea as a community space in the bottom here. And then at the end of the day, time ran out. We couldn't find an operator, and there was competing interest from the Parks Department to dedicate it as a park. So that community space is gone, wiped off the plan. It's now becoming a park. Another example, 412 Church, which is a second coming of our Waverly student housing brand, right by TMU. We had a side heritage semi detached dwelling we had to keep. We wanted to dedicate it as community use that would offset our community benefits. Couldn't find an operator, didn't really know where to start. Time ran out, and we just ending up selling them off as townhomes. Like kind of a sad story where there was some good intent. We don't know who the operators are. This is just the space on the site plan. And just ending on this quick slide, many of the things I talked about, I'll just leave this with you, but we move very quickly. We need on-the-fly problem solvers. You need to know how we operate. It's part of that kind of dating, understanding what's important and the pinch points for us. Just allows quicker timelines, decision-making, predictability, accountability. And then offsetting costs. Again, we're stewards of our investors' capital. Things need to have an obvious benefit. And then just knowing the funding, build a referral network, and then don't dilute your vision, appoint your champions, don't overwhelm your potential partner. Say, I'm going to get back to you in 5 days, and then get back to them in 3 days. Like, avoid the hollow promises, drawn out processes, and quick decision-making. Come prepared, do your homework, present solutions to your partner's problems. So there's a lot of homework that potential partners need to do on one another. And then showcase your operational chops. I'm so impressed meeting with these groups all the time of how great they are, what they do, but people, it's not shining through in their proposals. So that's kind of where I'll end off, and any questions, here to help.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Greg. And I think, yeah, this is such a great way to end the present series of presentations, and just we can share these slides with the group as well as the recording, because this is a great way to, prompt conversations within your organizations, like, determine whether you're ready to start reaching out to form some of these partnerships, or even discuss the partnerships that you're interested in starting, and and just make sure that you're partner ready for some of this work. And it's really great to hear your perspective on, the work that you've done so far, and these conversations that you've had with other groups. So I think at this point in the webinar, we're going to open it up for questions. Our team also has some questions for a panel discussion, but maybe we'll start with questions that have come up in the chat. So if folks have any questions, you can also put them in the chat or raise your hand. But I think we'll start with Ronald's question, and we can just do a go around to see what our guest speakers have to say. So Ronald's question, the contracts that are required for affordable development, are they customized based on CCDC and OAA contracts? And who ensures that the off-ramps and such supporting clauses are enforceable? So I'm going to pass that over to Tristina first, and then over to Tim and Greg.
Sure. So thanks, Alex, and thanks, Ronald. I think this is actually such a great question. For those who aren't familiar, a CCDC contract is a contract that you would have with your builder. So it might be a fixed price contract, it might be for construction management. That's the Canadian Construction Standard documents. And then the OAA contract is the contract that you would have with your architect. So I would say for affordable housing, we are using the exact same OAA CCDC contracts, and how we customize it for our client and for our projects is through the supplementary conditions. And so the supplementary conditions are usually kind of exceptions to what the general conditions of those contracts would look like. So for example, CMHC for the co-investment fund has very, very rigorous insurance requirements that are outside of what you would typically expect in a kind of a typical CCDC2 or a stipulated price contract, which most of those projects are doing. So we would add supplementary conditions that are very transparent about what those insurance requirements are. We spend a lot of time making sure that if any funder has any requirement that needs to make its way into the CCDC or into the OAA contract, that we're very clear in the supplementary conditions about that. And when we tender, we actually typically will attach the supplementary conditions to the tender so that we're setting clear expectations from the very beginning when somebody is bidding on a job as to what they can expect in the supplementary conditions. And then in terms of who ensures that those off-ramps are enforceable, that's where we have lawyers. So that's where we make sure that the language in the supplementary conditions are enforceable and are valid based on kind of the contract that we're looking at. So that's why I really recommend kind of always having a lawyer review anything. And we have kind of our own in-house supplementary conditions that we use for the CCDC contracts and for the OAA contracts, but we develop those in partnership with a variety of lawyers. So we have some touch points based on kind of what makes sense based on the project that we're working on. But such a great question. And yes, making sure that things are enforceable and clear and managing those expectations is definitely key to make sure that everybody gets what they need to get to at the very end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tristina. And then Tim or Greg, do you have any other comments or responses? Oh, Tim, just a second.
I think Tristina's covered it quite well. That particularly for architects, you can often have the first phase of conceptual work may even just be a more an initial letter, depending on the architect you're working with, and you know, your organization's familiar to do work on conceptual. But before not too long, you'll need to definitely set out to have the Ontario Association of Architects contract language. And then typically you can have that language where we're just doing this until we find out if the project's going to be a go or not.
Just for us, we're the construction managers, Fitzrovia Construction Management, building these buildings, handing them over without defections to the city and the operators. It's a standard construction manager contract. I think it's the CCDC 5A that we use, and that's similarly used for little. We renovated a church recently. Same thing, like just a very straightforward. Well, it's not straightforward legally, but the agreements are. I think it was the fellow, his name mentioned.
Great, thank you. And since there aren't questions in the chat, I think I'm going to go into some of the questions that our team has and just do a bit of a go around. So the first question that we have is, you know, knowing that a lot of the groups here and the groups that go through our programs are nonprofit organizations interested in building capacity to develop their own projects or looking into partnerships. I'm wondering if you can respond to, you know, what you think the nonprofit sector, like how the nonprofit sector can build resiliency to anticipate unexpected delays or challenges in a project. And I know that you've already spoken to that in your presentations, but just maybe some like key takeaways for the groups leaving from the conversation today. And so maybe can we start with Tim, because we started with Tristina last time.
I mean, for groups, one, having the conversation up front that there's going to need to be some money they access right away to get through even the additional work through of goal setting, searching for land, doing initial due diligence on the land. Yes, as things move along, you will look at the nonprofit group will look to access funding wherever it can in terms of helping to support those costs, but it's not realistic for almost all groups to say we're just enthusiastic, but we don't have any money to begin with. Is you're not going to get very far, unfortunately. I wish I could say a different answer than that. And that may be where you've got the enthusiasm and interest that maybe need to see about collaborating with another organization at that point.
Thanks, Tim. I'll pass over to Tristina next.
Sure. I think that's a great question. I think Tim answered it really well in terms of being kind of CAP ready and just understanding that. The other piece that I would add, and I think you know, Gregory and Tim also echo this in their presentation, is be able to make decisions quickly. And that's not to say that you can't have a meaningful project visioning process. But it's really important to say when the process has ended, to say, we feel good or good enough about what is on our project vision list. We have a sense of the must-have items, the nice-to-have items, and oh, if extra funding flows tomorrow, we're going to throw these extra items in. And to just say, we're okay with that. Not necessarily to say it's just good enough, but to say, could this be a win? If we had a project that just got us our little green list, is this a win? Is this enough for us to proceed? And then that is actually the foundation for being able to have meaningful conversations with developers like Fitzrovia, because again, your ask is clear. There's no kind of misconception about who's in the room, what their interests are. And so I think resiliency is very much tied to knowing who you're serving, knowing why you're serving them, and knowing what a win is going to be for them if you get a housing project built and having that clear vision. So they're very much tied together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say with the projects that we've had, unfortunately, we've been the ones that have had to absorb that downside risk with interest rates, construction costs, et cetera. So we've basically made a deal with the city at the zoning level. It says, hey, we're going to build a building equal to $4 million for this group. And then at time of building permit, we have to deliver and fund that building equal to $4 million. So in the past, the language it needs to be like tightly written so that the affordable housing partner is protected, and that but like you may have to start triaging your asks as you get closer to construction, because that $4 million that you agreed to in zoning, when 24 months later, when you're going under construction, you may not be able to deliver as much as you were able to. So I think that's important to kind of have that list of items that like I mentioned in my slide deck, the 8 things you want. Maybe you start with that, and then, but be prepared to accept 4 of them. But in the past, we've been the ones that have had to absorb those cost increases and still deliver the same building we said we were going to at the zoning stage 3 years earlier.
Yeah, that's really helpful insight from each of you. And that was going to be the next question about, how can organizations better prepare for changes in costs, funding, resources that are out there. I'm wondering, if you can speak to like, are you, for nonprofits specifically, and a question that we get a lot is, how do organizations prepare for projects with their boards, and how do you develop that decision-making capacity and like on their own teams for really working on a project? I wonder if you can speak to, like the capacity building side of things for nonprofit organizations, and like from your perspective, like, whether they should have like what the structure could look like having a specific committee on the board, or like hiring staff from the very beginning to develop to work on the development of a project and managing partnerships, or if a combination of the two kind of works well.
I'll jump in. Just a couple different experiences I've had, and what has gone really well is when you kind of have those anointed project champions, but then you actually rely on potentially a paid expert nonprofit lawyer and architect, like people that are actually up to date and current, and they'll probably work on a pro bono for a portion of it. But I hate to say this, but it's really, you really need to avoid these kind of retired industry experts that I would just pay a small group of people to help consult and kind of say whether ideas are good or not, and kind of be that grown up in the room to the larger committees that these organizations have. But like I said, like have these design charrettes, have these ideation sessions, come up with 10 things, work through them, and then rely on those experts to help kind of sift through the most important ones and then bring those forward. That's what I've seen work well. And then we've had the city, who knows better than anyone, the Affordable Housing Office, kind of just be the intermediary to say, we're going to give this group 50 affordable housing units. and they're just kind of off on the sideline waiting for their 50 affordable housing units, and the city's the one kind of making those design decisions and forcing us to in different directions.
Thanks, Greg.
I'm just gonna to jump in. We have occasionally found actually some very helpful retired board members who are retired. But I get where you're coming from, Greg, about extras that we certainly advise groups that are moving forward to try to set up a development committee of perhaps 2 or 3 people at the most who will become more informed. And yes, they do need to make sure they have some expertise, but also even before they start too far down the journey, to have those discussions about what's realistic in the market today, both in terms of costs and levels of affordability. We certainly work with a number of groups who are so committed. They want to have units that are affordable to a single person on a disability pension who gets $556 a month to cover rent. Unless someone's giving the building away, very hard to make $556 a month work. So part of it is trying to have those discussions early on about, one, can there be some collaboration with some rent supplements for some of the units through the city, perhaps, or if they've worked with a provincial ministry, and even saying if some of the units are at what are called CMHC average market rents, which are now $1,708 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in Toronto. For many nonprofit boards, they'll absolutely say that is not affordable. Thinking, well, it's better than $2,500 or $2,600 a month if you're actually out looking for an apartment right now in the city. But once the nonprofit owns those units over time, those rents will start to moderate and be even more affordable compared to the market. So having those discussions about ranges of affordability, given the realities of costs and interest rates, I think it's really important to have that upfront. But again, that steers back to Tristina's slide about having that good goal discussion, recognizing there's got to be some flexibility though as you move forward trying to achieve the goals.
Thanks, Tim. Over to you.
I might also quickly add, and this isn't to be a plug or to sell development consulting services, but I do think that my team, Tim's team, brings a level of sophistication about the full development process and being able to have these difficult conversations with board members, have them anticipate what's on the horizon, some of these challenges. So I would highly recommend that if groups are kind of at that stage where they don't know where to begin, they don't know how to build capacity on their board, sometimes the first step is doing a small feasibility study and saying, is there some potential here? It's an opportunity to kind of test out working with the development consultant to see if you jive well, if the expectations can be met. I will say I have interviewed with many boards that were very skeptical about having a development consultant. And then 6 months later, they are preaching our praises to every other nonprofit in their community because they see the value that we bring to the table. So again, not just to make a plug, but we have worked with several retired board members who have come around to working with development consultants because they understand that that it is a process and it is a level of sophistication to really kind of oversee and project manage that from beginning to end.
Shameless plugs are okay, Tristina.
Yeah. I mean, we invited you to be on a panel, so obviously we want to support your work. Yeah, and I think in terms of, not another plug, but for our programs, what we found works well, which is like working with groups in like very, very early stages of concept development is, at the very least having one board member and one staff member, or like having more than one person working on a project from the very beginning, because of all the reasons we're all familiar with, if that one person leaves, what happens to the project? Like having those conversations with, with teams earlier on in terms of like, who's committed to working on the project, and also knowing that you'll have to hire consultants because not everyone will know all of the, or have the expertise that's needed. Okay, so we have 2 more questions in the chat. So from Ronald, know your tools. So is the not-for-profit organization expected to bring a pro forma and know the details of the financials before coming to the table? And are the financials integrated within a pro forma of a private sector builder in partnership? So who funds what and what are the splits? So I think there are a few different ways to respond to this question, but maybe I'll pass it to who would like to start. Let's see, yeah, Tristina. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to just dive in. I would say, like, it is in the nonprofit's best interest to have as best of an understanding of kind of what the financial mechanics of the potential project might be. I would say if it's, let's say it's a nonprofit that has a piece of land that they are willing to contribute or to sell, it really is incumbent on the nonprofit to know the value of that land and what that means to the developer. So if the land is worth $15 million and you're saving a developer having to buy that piece of land for $15 million, you should have a sense of what the project costs are, how many units that might buy you if you're going to be buying units in that building, for example, as well as the amount of equity that you might be able to bring to the table and the incentive. So knowing if you can tap into development charge waivers, any type of planning fee relief. I do think it's really important to come prepared. If I was in a situation where I was meeting with Greg and his group about talking about a piece of land or a potential building project, we would have a pro forma prepared to be able, not necessarily to share every single piece of detail, but be able to get to sense of what is each group willing to bring to the table, finance-wise, capacity-wise, land-wise. That's where you get to the most meaningful discussions.
Just very quickly, that we do also still have a number of boards that were developed 1 or 2 buildings back in the early 90s that don't have any real sense of what the programs are these days, and have to also understand that under $500,000 a unit is a challenge in terms of for costs and what that means for affordability. And just even the last three or 4 years, how much the true market rents have gone up. And so those are really key pieces to have a discussion on quickly, right away, with the nonprofit board that you're going to be working with, whether as development consultant or we're partnering with a company like Greg's.
Yeah, I would just echo what Tristina said. Know what your land value is, have an idea of what can be built on it from a planning perspective, height, density, number of units. Know your just basic costs, like Tim said, 500 grand to build a 1-bedroom hard cost kind of thing in city of Toronto, and go from there. Like if the land's worth 20 million, maybe you can say, we'll give you the land, but you got to build us 40 units and turn them over to us turnkey, like something as simple as that. We would do that deal all day long.
Awesome. Thank you. And just one more question from the chat, and then I think we'll wrap things up. So Ainsley says, I'm working with a lot of churches that are looking at redeveloping their land. Most of them are jumping into interviewing developers before they build their vision, in hopes that the developer will help them with that. So what advice would you give to these churches and committees? And who would like to start?
I'll just going back to still trying to have their vision of what they're trying to achieve. To recognize that they will have, like in discussions with developer, a mix, whether it can be a small portion of units for congregation members, and to get a sense of what they're trying to achieve before they get into any detailed discussions with developers, who will bring lots of other good ideas and practical ideas to the mix. But just to try and say, what are they looking to achieve? Is there going to be space? Do they want to still have a sanctuary space in a rebuilt building? Or is it really the land to be used in a legacy way, but not part of a sanctuary or regular congregation meetings?
Yeah, I would just go back to kind of try and scope down whatever, if you want to do a SWOT analysis or whatever, find the most important things, find the nice to haves, and kind of start with that, with the conversation, and then ideas will flow from there, I would say.
The only other piece that I would completely echo everything that Greg and Tim said. The only other piece that I'd share is, if you have the capacity to do some background due diligence, I would recommend doing it. So ordering your environmentals, ordering a geotechnical study, ordering an appraisal, some of those pieces can help you understand, at least with an appraisal, you might get a good sense of kind of what the developability of that site might look like. And then things like your environmental site assessment or the geotechnical assessment will give you a sense of, is there anything really tricky about the land that someone's going to need to know from a remediation standpoint? So again, you can go into a conversation strong and say, our phase one, our environmental, say our site is clean, our soils are good, or, we've got servicing to the city services or municipality services. Like if you can show all the wins that you're bringing to a developer about how good your site is, that also helps to make the compelling case for the vision that you're then trying to sell of, give us 20 units, give us 40 units, whatever the negotiation piece is.
And just with pick on that because there is such a push, not just in Toronto, but in almost every municipality across the province, if not the country, of doing something about affordable housing. You are the positive that the developer can bring to the table when dealing with city planning staff and city councilors, saying this is such a high priority with the municipality. We are going to help meet that needs. We're going to help fix the problem. Not totally fix it with one building, but make good progress.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation, and I think this is like information and guidance and advice and expertise that is sometimes hard to find, especially if organizations are in the earliest stages of developing a project. So I hope that today's conversation has helped to alleviate some concerns that folks have and respond to some of those questions that they've been having. And yeah, just one round of applause on Zoom for all of our guest speakers. Thank you so much, everyone. I think so. This is the first of the webinar series that we're hosting in March, and then we'll have another webinar next Tuesday at the same time, and we'll send a reminder out to folks about that as well. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, and yeah, wish everyone well.